All right, guys, welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are be doing our 2024 preview and prediction for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ryan Day returns after a 56-8 record through 5 seasons. Chip Kelly arrives as the offensive coordinator, going to split those duties with Brian Hartline. Obviously, Kelly leaving his post as the UCLA head coach for the past couple of seasons. And then Jim Knowles enters his third year on staff. He's actually done wonders resurrecting this defense. And obviously, the headlines for Ohio State, they lost in the Cotton Bowl with basically a third-string quarterback, losing 3 straight to Michigan, and then in return ran Kyle McCord out of town essentially. Looking at this offense, Nick, I picked this team to do a lot last season. It was mainly because of the upside I thought this offense had, and the ceiling just never seemed to eclipse where they were at. Really, in the middle part of the season with Kyle McCord at quarterback, week after week, kept waiting for him to break out on this side of the ball, and they just never did. That's crazy to think. This team only put up 30.5 points per game last year. The yardage totals weren't as high as they should have been, and that's what's going to lead you to a new quarterback here in Will Howard, a guy who's a natural pocket passer with a big arm, plenty of mobility. At Kansas State, I saw that he was a willing runner. Falls forward of his size is 6'5", 242, impressive speed. Was ripped off plenty of runs and is a live runner at the goal line. But he throws a high-arcing ball, showcase nice patience when he identifies a winnable matchup / the open man. Does have a tendency to force the ball into traffic. Did have 10 interceptions last year. Accuracy and efficiency haven't been great, but he's a good fit, I think, in this scheme with his arm and his stature and obviously experience as well, Nick. Kind of talk about, this offense and how disappointing they were, because when you have a guy like Marvin Harrison and all these weapons and whatnot, for them to, not perform to the level they should have last year is very disappointing, especially in the middle half of the season where they couldn't find 40 points.
This offense struggled, and this team was extremely disappointing on offense, despite the talent that you allude to Marvin Harrison Jr. at McCord. I still think McCord is a very talented quarterback. When you look at the results last year, this team was just not your average Ohio State team. They just really could not produce on offense, and you question whether or not that was Hartline, whether it was the general play calling, whether it was the players, whether it was McCord, who seemed to be the scapegoat as he was run out of town. I mean, just looking at the results at Indiana, 23 points. Hosting Youngstown State FCS 35 points, at Notre Dame 17 points, hosting Penn State 20 points, at Wisconsin 24 points. These are numbers that are just not high enough for an Ohio State team. 24 points at Michigan, 3 points at Missouri in the Cotton Bowl, obviously a bit of an outlier there, but still only 3 points in that game. And even in their bigger wins, really outside of Western Kentucky where they put up 63 points, they weren't super impressive. 37 points against Maryland, 41 points against Purdue, 38 against Michigan State, and 37 against Minnesota. Those are numbers you expect higher from an offense that had the amount of talented players they had. And Marvin Harrison Jr., who was really just incredible for this offense. McCord, who I thought had a really solid season as well. They run him out of town, and now you're going to look at Will Howard and see what he can do. You bring in Chip Kelly, who obviously was kind of going stale at UCLA. It wasn't really working out for him, but with the relaxed duties of just play calling, taking away from, focusing as the head coach day-to-day operations, I think Kelly could really be an incredible hire for this Ohio State team. Let's face it, Ryan Day needs to get results this year. I know it's crazy to say that a coach that's 56-8 could be on the hot seat, but losing to Michigan 3 years in a row, not making it back to the national title game since 2020 where they were blown out by Alabama, struggling in the playoffs and not making the playoffs last year, things are getting hot for Ryan Day. He brings in Will Howard, who I think could be a really solid fit. I love the size of him. I think the mobility is fantastic. The willing runner, great arm strength, really solid pocket presence, a veteran quarterback who has experience at Kansas State for years, a really solid leader in the locker room. But if this team doesn't figure it out, you got to ask a lot of questions. That offense was just not good enough last year.
41 against Purdue is the most they had against a Power 5 team all year long. And like you said, even against an FCS team, they couldn't clip that mark. So very disappointing stuff in that regard. But they're also a pass-first team last season, which of all this talent, that's really not a bad thing. But this is a team that wants to run the football, and everyone knows that. And it was just incredibly difficult last year, especially if Travion Henderson wasn't healthy. He still ended the year 926 and 11 scores. He's coming back, a guy who showcases good breakaway speed, electric in the open field, nice burst, mainly a one-cut back. He doesn't have this creativity. He's been a solid pass catcher for him, showcases good contact balance. But again, he largely saved this ground game last season, and his durability over his career has not been great. But go ahead and replace, durability concerns with Quinshon Judkins, Nick. Obviously, he's been an elite runner for Ole Miss the past 2 seasons, had a bit of a fallout there in Oxford. He arrives here in Columbus, a guy who's a hard physical runner, elite contact balance, runs like a bull, good acceleration in the open field. Great burst on inside zone runs for being 6', 219. Plenty of goal line work for him. This is a good fit. Ryan Day typically has good running backs with some type of combo of those traits I just listed off, and Judkins checks the box in every single one of them. This run game only put up 138 yards per game last year. Obviously, very disappointing mark. They had one touchdown drive against Michigan where they were just running straight at them and had a lot of success. But for the most part, all year long, they only had 2 games of 200-plus yards rushing against Notre Dame. Henderson had a long run that accounted for, a large portion of the 126 yards they had in that contest. They just could not run the football, Nick. They were playing in long down situations for a majority of the season. And it doesn't matter how many Marvin Harrisons you got or how good you are, you do not want to live in 3rd and long. I just know that's a big concern that Ohio State had last season, and it certainly led to them scoring significantly less points.
The issue on the ground is certainly noticeable when you look at the stats for Ohio State last year. They're 45th in the nation in points per game, 48th in yards per game, 31 in pass yards per game, but 88th in rush yards per game at 138.5 yards per game. Just not a good enough number if you're Ohio State. They really seem to lack balance. They relied on McCord's arm too much, which when you have Marvin Harrison Jr., sure, you want to target him, but they really did not have a good balance at all. Trayvon Henderson, nearly 1,000 yards on the ground, 11 scores for him, plus 19 grabs out of the backfield for 230 yards receiving. So he's a really solid back who can really be a good piece to move throughout your offense. They bring in Quinshon Judkins, who I think is a really incredible add. 1,100 yards his first year at Ole Miss, plus 15 touchdowns last year. His first year was 1,500 yards. Last year he did dip in production, 1,100 yards, but still over 1,000 yards rushing in both seasons in Ole Miss. 16 touchdowns in 2022, 15 touchdowns in 2023. Obviously, really solid numbers. 22 grabs out of the backfield last year as well, plus 2 receiving touchdowns. So he's been involved in a variety of different ways for that offense. He had 34 carries in the bowl game against Penn State last year for 100 yards. You're going to want to use him a lot. I think they're going to give him, 25 to 30 carries at least per game, potentially 35 carries depending on the matchup, as this is a guy that could really carry the offense, a really solid portal ad from Ryan Day's staff.
Yeah, bold acclamation there to assume he'll get that many touches, but he can certainly handle the workload if they need him to do that. 2 true freshmen, a top 150 recruit in James Peoples, and then a 3-star athlete, Sam Williams-Dixon, backed them up. Looking at this wide receiver core, and it remains the best in the nation, I would say, even with the loss of Harrison. Julian Fleming departs. Emeka Egbuka, he's a guy who lines up on the slot a lot, covers ground very fast, in yards after catch situation, a good route runner. Finding the soft spot in zone is something he's very good at, adjusts well and can catch away from his frame, matched with those reliable hands, builds speed quickly. It's primarily been used as an underneath intermediate guy, 6'1", 206 pounds. Carnell Tate, a former 5-star, is a good route runner, smooth athlete, and does a good job tracking the ball. He can play inside, but should be the X here, about 191 pounds. Another high-end recruit, Brandon Ennis, competitive player. He's pretty explosive out of his stance. He can separate with quick feet, does a good job plucking the ball into the air, has also really improved his run after catch ability in terms of, making plays in the open field. And of course, the guy everyone's talking about, top-ranked recruit, Nick, usually when you're a top-ranked recruit heading into college football, you end up being a very good player that makes a lot of money at the next level. And Jeremiah Smith is next in line in that category. A big spring practice for him. Contested catch specialist. He has an imposing frame of 6'3", 215. Considered a dynamic route runner. Does a good job avoiding traffic in terms of his yard after catch situations. Also have another 5-star Mylan Graham. They have a top 60 recruit in Jaden Ballard, who was in the class of 21, enters his 4th season. He hasn't done much. And then Bryson Rogers, a 3-star in last year's class. Just a few players that are in the rotation that could potentially have opportunities. What do you think of this, Nick? It's all 5 stars right here at the top of this receiving depth chart. And again, Smith seems like he's going to set the world on fire this year.
Smith is an incredible add, the number 1 player in his class, number 1 wide receiver, top player out of Florida, just one of the best players to come out of South Florida, really in modern recruiting. You got to look back probably in about 20 to 30 years to see a guy of his talent coming out of South Florida, a really, really incredible add for Ohio State here, a guy that had, everyone in the nation calling his name. I think the size at 6'3", 215 is fantastic. He can really overpower defensive backs. Just an incredible player, top to bottom. A guy who ran track in high school, a really solid track runner as well. So that's incredible speed right there when you look at that. This is a guy who you're going to plug in day one, who's going to be an impact starter at the wide receiver X position. Jaden Ballard is right there as well, who could really be an impact player as well. Carnell Tate, 264 yards receiving and a score for him last year. And then Emeka Egbuka, who's a guy I'm still really high on. I think he has Incredible opportunity to grow, 515 yards receiving, 12.6 yards per grab, and 4 scores for him last year in the slot. This is an incredible wide receiver room where you look at it. And Smith, if he reaches the heights that we expect of him, he could be like Marvin Harrison Jr. in 2-3 years at this point in time. Just an incredibly highly rated, incredibly talented wide receiver. Ohio State continues to produce talented wide receiver after talented wide receiver to the NFL draft, and it looks like Smith's another one in that long line of talented players.
Biggest concern we had with the Buckeyes entering last season was this offensive line, and they certainly, kind of matched expectations as, again, the run game was just not very good. Left tackle Josh Simmons is back. He was pretty admirable, certainly better, and I expected him to be only allowed 1 sack. Staff is happy with what he might be able to provide this year. Look at Seth McLaughlin as center. He costed Alabama numerous times with poor snaps across the board, and he wasn't all that great in pass protection either. Carson Hinsman, last year's starter, struggled bad in his own right as center. Josh Fryer might move inside, shows good lateral agility. His run blocking improvements might be a reason for that, but definitely seems comfortable at tackle. So I certainly think that might be where he ends up staying. But Luke Montgomery seems like a player they need on the field with his athletic ability and the aggressive nature he plays with, finishes blocks. They need that kind of prowess up front. So I certainly think there's some things that can be done on that right side. 4-star true sophomore Anek Vama transfers out. He started at right guard in the bowl game and started mightily. Tegra Tajbola was a near 5-star in the class of 22. Might get some time at right guard. Again, this right side seems unclear a bit, but it's a solid unit here. This should be better when it comes to generating run lanes, I would say, especially when you return a guy like Donovan Jackson, who just significantly improved in pass blocking, gave back a little bit as a run blocker, great power, the athletic ability, and his agility provides nimble feet. Needs to progress his balance and overall consistency. I think he should play at a high All-American level in 2024. What do you make of this offensive line, Nick? Because a lot of people say, that's all Day cares about is recruiting skilled positions, doesn't focus enough on the O-line. And I think there's certainly some truth to that, but I certainly think this is a starting 5 that can make some big strides.
There is some truth to Ryan Day focusing on recruiting those talented, positional star players and really ignoring the offensive line, which has struggled over the time. This is a unit that's a little bit better than last year's unit. I think Simmons has a lot of room to continue to grow. Jonathan Jackson, I like what he has been able to do. I think Josh Fryer, wherever you want to put him at right tackle or right guard, I think he's a guy that can continue to develop. George Fitzpatrick, Luke Montgomery are guys that are going to be involved on that right side as well. The add of Seth McLaughlin as an Alabama fan, good riddance, good luck, best of luck to you, but you really did damage the Tide last year. I don't know what he's going to look like at center for this team. Is he going to be more confident? He's going to have those snaps in line, but his snaps are absolutely atrocious last year and cost Alabama, particularly in the Rose Bowl, multiple times, including on the final play of the game. A bad snap really broke that play and put Jalen Milroe in a tough position as Alabama lost to Michigan, who ended up winning a national championship last year. But overall, this offensive line that's getting better as time goes on and is a sizable unit that can really, be a strong support staff, create good running lanes for those running backs.
Offensive verdict here, they returned 6 starters. They do lose 3 of their top 4 pass catchers. They only returned 1 guy that had 30-plus rushing yards. They lost 15 guys in the portal. This is still a highly talented unit. The Buckeyes are coming off a massive disappointment on offense. The run game struggled bad. Passing game ceiling just never rose. And they came up just short of beating Michigan once again. Wide receiver group is elite, match of a better fit at quarterback, an absurd 1-2 punch at running back is behind what should be an improved offensive line. I'm going to give this, an A to an A+. This unit should be phenomenal this year, and I think Ryan Day is going to be incredibly motivated to do so, and Chip Kelly's going to add a lot of insight as well. Moving to the defensive side of the ball, a couple of years back, this team was just horrendous on this side of the ball after, an elite unit led by Chase Young took them to the playoffs, and they're back in that category next second in terms of scoring defense, top of the country in numerous statistics. They get 9 starters back, Nick, and I never see teams that return this many starters with those numbers. It leads you to think they're going to play like the 85 Bears, and it's going to start with this defensive line, defensive end JT Tumalau, an aggressive pass rusher, with inconsistent motor, but he's a very impressive athlete for being 6'5", 269, good power, good burst off the line of scrimmage, some nice length. I like the leg drive and hand placement. Seems to always beat those pulling tight ends or offensive linemen. Hasn't really showcased to be a disruptor in the run game. The pursuit isn't great. Has lateral agility. JT didn't really take that next level like we thought he would this past season. We only had 7 tackles for loss. You look at Jack Sawyer, a former number 1 recruit in his own right. Shows good discipline versus the run. Good strength to bully opposing tackles backwards. He's a aggressive force of nature. 7.5 of his 10.5 TFLs, though, came over the final 3 games of the season, so he just, bit down and was great for this defense in the back half of the year. He was very efficient for the most part, but the production needs to be greater than that, Nick. You can't have all your, numbers come over the couple of games stretch, and I think Sawyer's certainly going to deliver more.
There's a fun part of this defense that has some really talented players. Jack Sawyer, a really good leader for this team. You want to see him take that step forward, though. 48 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, good numbers. But again, you can expect a little bit more out of him this year. I think he's going to have an opportunity to move around and be a little more disruptive, all coming off that left side of the edge. His partner on that right side, JT Tomolo, as well. 38 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 5 sacks for him. He needs to step up his game a little bit, in my opinion, but he still is a player that is extremely dominant on that right side. Really solid speed, nice footwork. If he can continue to improve his game and get those tackles for loss and sack numbers up, that could certainly help out this defense.
And obviously the consistency from those two wasn't great, but it was really sound from the interior, I thought. Tyleik Williams, an explosive athlete who has, great strength to eat up blocks, has good foot quickness that allows him to stunt, good motor, shows a nice pursuit. Less than ideal length and doesn't have the best change of direction, but again, he's still 6'3", 327. Alongside him, redshirt senior defensive tackle and Ty Hamilton that's proven to be a great run stopper, 295 pounds. They're hoping Caden McDonald at 320, a 4-star from last year's class, can make an impact in the rotation. They also have 2 former top 150 recruits in Caden Curry and Kanata Jackson that will be the backups for the edge department. Pretty good defensive line here, Nick. I would call it great. Lots of experience, elite talent. These guys are certainly going to play very good this season. I would assume so. This should be easily a top 5 run defense, and they should be able to provide a lot of sacks as well.
Tyleik Williams is a really solid player. When you look at this defense last year, they're 29th in the nation against the run, which was their only weak spot, their only part of their unit that wasn't a top 5 unit last year. But I can see them improving that and getting that number down and cutting down those yards per game. Williams, 53 total tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 5 pass breakups. Good numbers there. Ty Hamilton, 38 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. I think those numbers are solid, productive numbers so far. I like what I've seen in the middle here. I think, Caden McDonald, he could step up and be involved as a rotational piece. Some other names there that you rattled off could be involved as well. Kanata Jackson is a guy that has some opportunity to be involved. He had 7 total tackles last year, 2 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. I think this front part of this defense is really strong and a good start to this defense.
You look at the middle of what's a 4-2-5, the linebacking group. CJ Hicks, an ex-5 star, has barely played in 2 years and anything more than a special teamer. He's a guy who's got good ball skills, who's fluid in space. He's considered a coverage asset. He can even be an explosive player as a pass rusher, a 6'2", 230. Cody Simon really came into his own last year. He was 4th on the team in tackles, despite only playing less than 400 snaps. He was good in the start he got versus Missouri, so I certainly think he can build off that. Arvell Reese, a 4-star from last year's class, will be in the mix as well. I think the biggest thing here, though, is Sonny Styles, what kind of impact he will have, as it looks like he's going to make that full-time switch to linebacker. Does a good job making plays in the box. A sound wrap-up tackler who was very impressive versus the run. He's 6'4", 235, Nick. He just was not, the requisite size to be playing in the back end, especially in cover 1 or cover 2 looks. Played more snaps in the box than anything, but he was forced to play strong safety in the back half of the season once Latham Ransom got hurt, and that's when the inconsistent play started for him. Never been a liability in coverage, but he did, struggle to make some tackles in the back half of the year, including one against Blake Corum that led to a big touchdown. This is a better use for his skill set, though, Nick. A former 5-star playing in the middle. I think Styles will certainly thrive here, a bit of a versatile role.
I think Styles has the opportunity to step up and be a better player at linebacker than he was in the secondary. This is a good move for him. I think this is going to adjust for him well. 53 total tackles last year, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Really good in coverage. I do worry about the tackles a little bit. You pointed out a couple instances where the tackles were a little inconsistent. That does worry me, and that leads me to feel a little worried about about the middle part of this defense's linebacking core, particularly because Sonny Styles, I think is a bit hit or miss, and CJ Hicks as well. We haven't seen a whole lot out of him. Only 8 tackles last year in 13 games. Kind of a special teamer, is not really used a whole lot. This middle part of this defense, if I have one area of pinpoint concern on this team, it's going to be the linebacking core, because there's 2 wild cards there in Styles and Hicks, that is.
You look at the secondary unit that's really came into its own, their first national against the pass, and it's certainly acceptable to say they didn't play the greatest passing attacks by any means, but if you're not good, these teams will certainly expose you. That's something that Ohio State is very good. And we made a video, a couple months ago, Nick, and I said the Jim Thorpe Award winner was going to come from this room one way or another. We have so many candidates here. You're going to start with Davison Igbeson at corner, was a highly regarded run defender. He loves to attack the legs of opposing runners. He had the best, lowest missed tackle percentage on the team, has nice recovery speed to close gaps in coverage, needs to improve the ball tracking ability and the skills when it comes to carrying vertically. But I think this should be a household name this season alongside Denzel Burke, a guy who's got good length, confident in press, has the quickness to mirror underneath, has good closing burst along with ball skills. Want to see him really involved to a feared corner, kind of like Denzel Ward and Marshawn Lattimore, where, Burke has not really become that feared elite guy on that side of the ball for them. You look at Caleb Downs, a guy that leaves Alabama after a phenomenal year as a true freshman for Nick Saban's bunch. This is a guy that can play in the box or be a center fielder, embraces contact, a smooth, instinctive player, real student of the game, quickly arrives at the catch point, was a hard hitter in the run game. He improved significantly in coverage following a poor first 3 games to start his career. So this guy is an adamant hard worker. Next to him, Latham Ransom only played 8 games, did miss that last month of the season, but he was doing much better in coverage. In the past, he's shown good ability to match up in coverage with some of the nation's better tight ends. He's a willing tackler in the box, hits with some authority, good route recognition, and closing speed. More complex routes and bad vision, though, have led to inconsistent play from him at 6'1", 210. And then a guy in Jordan Hancock. He ended up being the full-time slot. Really delivered in that spot, had 2 picks and 5 pass breakups. Showcased some nice closing ability on his end. And I was very happy with Jermaine Matthews Jr., a 4-star true freshman. He was very sticky in man coverage, always seemed to be right in phase with wide receivers, was real handsy with them, and was never called for a single penalty. Showcased good anticipation as well. I mean, this is elite across the board in this secondary, Nick. Is this the Jim Thorpe Award winner laying in this room?
Very good unit here that added a really talented player and bringing in Caleb Downs, who, devastating loss for Alabama, in my opinion, a guy that was really incredible. Did not look great the first couple of games, but turned around to top, over 100 tackles last year for him. Really good in coverage. What an incredible add. Downs will be really solid for this team. Very versatile player. They'll be able to move him around. The players they return back, I think, are solid as well. I think Igmison as well, 59 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 5 pass breakups for him. Hancock, 41 total tackles, 2 interceptions for him, and 5 pass breakups last year. I think Denzel Burke, 9 pass breakups, 24 total tackles. I thought Burke was good in coverage, a good player, a good leader in this locker room. Latham Ransom as well, 34 total tackles, 1 pick, 2 pass breakups for him. Jermaine Matthews Jr., a guy that I think could really break out and be a star player this year and really could step up and be an incredible player. 13 total tackles, 3 pass breakups, plus a pick 6 for him last year. This is a very deep unit with a lot of talented players. They were number 1 against the pass last year in the nation. I think they could be number 1 against the pass again this year as they add Downs, and the rich only get richer up there in Columbus.
Yeah, like you alluded to, rich get richer. The verdict here for this side of the ball is, how often do you see a team rank amongst the top in CFB in numerous categories and then return 9 starters on that same unit the next year and then get even better, landing one of the nation's top safeties via transfer? The Buckeyes are doing just that, and at the same time, I think the potential's off the charts for what they can achieve this year on this side of the ball. And again, I think the Thorpe Award winner is in this group. There's going to be a lot of hard work taken on this side, I think. Look at the final prediction. Ohio State should be considered the favorite to win the national championship, as this defense is going to be ungodly difficult to deal with, while the offense will play with a bit of an edge after a disappointing effort in 23, which is led by a good transfer in Will Howard with an elite running back and wide receiver room. Really need to see this offensive line progress and be better than it was a season ago. But even if it's not, it'll be a tough ask to knock off this bunch. 2 very tricky road games, though, we're going to make or break this season, Nick, with Oregon and Penn State there in the middle part of the year. I have them conquering both of those challenges. You do as well. A+ across the board for Ohio State. This has got to be the year for the Buckeyes, and obviously we'll see what happens when they get to the playoffs. If they do, 12-0 here, Nick, and I think that, 1 loss on the road wouldn't be ultra shocking. This is college football after the end of the day. But if they go 10-2 in the regular season, you can say goodbye to Mr. Day.
This is certainly a put up or shut up year for Ohio State. They have to go out and get the job done this year. When you look at only 3 true road games, the game against Northwestern is being played at Wrigley Field. Michigan State, not really going to be a tough road game. The 2 games you circle, right, at Oregon, at Penn State. The one at Penn State was certainly the one I leaned closer to picking the upset in. I think, it's going to be rocking in Happy Valley. Certainly going to be a tough game. I think game's at whiteout potentially, or, at night, whatever they want to do at that situation. Penn State's a very tough place to play, but a lot of question marks on the Nittany Lions this year. We're going to preview them in a later episode. I have Ohio State at 12-0. This has got to be the year for Ryan Day here. It's crazy. Again, I said earlier in the episode, it's crazy that a guy that has the record that he has, 56-8 through 5 seasons, is on the hot seat, but they expect national titles in Columbus, and it's been a long time for this team since they won a national title by Ohio State standards. Of course, 3 straight losses to Michigan has been unacceptable. They have to beat the Wolverines this year, which we said last year, we said the year before they had to beat the Wolverines. They're going to have to do it again this year, and I think this is the year they will get the job done with a new, fresh coaching staff up there in Ann Arbor. I like this Ohio State team to be the national title favorites. I like them to be competing for a national title slot very convincingly. This is a very talented team that's incredible on defense. They made the right moves on offense, in my opinion. I just worry about the linebacking the middle part of the defense, is that unit going to stand up and be strong enough? I also worry about the running game with that offensive line a little bit, but overall, I think the combination of Hartline and Chip Kelly is a winning combination on the offensive side of the ball, play calling wise, and Will Howard is a veteran in college football who's going to be able to lead this team very deep in the playoffs. I have high expectations for the Buckeyes this year.
No excuses at all. They're great across the board. Offensive line, again, though, they need to pick up the slack a little bit to make sure there really is no issues for them. Kyle McCord, they felt was not the answer. He still showed up about 30, 40 yards short of beating Michigan and, punching their ticket to a conference championship game and the CFP. So, that speaks volumes of how good this team really is. It's me for today's episode, Nick. As always, appreciate you joining me. Always love talking the Buckeyes.
Super excited to see what this team can do this year. A very talented team with a pretty easy schedule, pretty straightforward. Want to see what they can do this year.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.